Middle East feast. The issue is the Middle East. And the question is, what does Biden's trip to Israel tell us about the future of Middle East relations?
Welcome to Political Playlist.
All right. Are we ready, guys?
Happy Hour.
Happy hour.
We fucked that up so bad.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Political Playlist Happy Hour. I'm Michael Kristoff.
I'm Anna Muskie-Goldwyn.
And I'm Anthony Barquette.
Well, we are drinking and talking and yucking it up. Middle East politics here. But first, what are we drinking, gang?
I'm like really recovering from weddings and I'm drinking water.
We're recording this on a Thursday.
I'm telling you, it was a very long stretch of really rowdy weddings.
My name is Anna, and hangovers last 3 to 5 business days. That's my impression of Anna. And also, it should be noted that we do impressions of Anna that sound nothing like Anna.
All the time.
All the time. It's the best.
But they're still funny.
All right, gang, we are talking Middle East today. All right. So Joe Biden traveled to Israel, where he met with the president and prime minister, basically reinforcing what is our longstanding diplomatic and geopolitical bond that we have with Israel. And I think what's noteworthy about this trip is that Joe Biden has literally met with every Israeli prime minister dating back to Golda Meir in 1973.
Wow.
Which I think.
Wow. Fun fact.
Bodes well for the gravitas he brings on this trip, but also that he is very
fucking old.
Yeah, that's crazy. So obviously the focus of this trip is our two countries' mutual interest in curbing the Iran nuclear program. The previous administration tore up that deal, which then restarted their program. And spoiler alert, they didn't renegotiate a new one. But I think what has been coming from this trip is sort of two different approaches between how the U.S. and the Israelis want to go about curbing this program. We're not really going to dive into that. And also, we should say that we're going to do part 1 today of this 2-part Middle East trip. Next week, we're going to be covering Saudi Arabia, the second leg of the trip. So today, I think let's talk about what our young politicians are doing and saying about the Biden trip to Israel. First, what do we think of this trip?
There's sort of two things happening while Biden's in Israel. There is this discussion around the Iran nuclear deal, which the U.S. in this administration is committed to re-entering. And then there is also discussion about the relationship between Israel and Palestine, because basically Biden is there talking about and praising Trump's Middle East accomplishment, the Abraham Accords, which strengthens relationships between Israel and other Arab countries. Palestine,
most notably UAE.
Yes. And the Palestinians are kind of angry about this because they're like, well, why are you focusing on Israel and all these other Arab countries, but not focusing on Israel and us? And the administration's response to that is that we are trying to take an incremental approach because trying to sort of solve the Israel-Palestine conflict on a very high level has always failed.
And aren't they also looking to try and help breathe some life into creating at least a openness to diplomacy with Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, and I think we'll probably hear more about that when he goes to Saudi Arabia. There's definitely been expressed interest from both governments that is possible. I think the Saudis have already said that they'll open airspace to Israel commercial airlines and also create direct flights from Israel to Saudi Arabia for the Israeli minority population of Muslims in Israel to make pilgrimages directly via air to Saudi Arabia, which is kind of interesting. But I think that what we should really be looking at is how the Biden administration is going to move forward, and specifically what politicians at home are saying about how he should move forward when it comes to not just our relationship with Israel, but our position of putting Israel sort of in deeper relations with Arab countries in the Middle East.
What I think is interesting about this is that it almost in a way seems like they're creating leverage against Palestine.
Yeah. And that's what they're saying, right? Is
Right.
they're saying you're putting all these other Arab countries before us. And the
Right.
reality is that the US is. And as you can
Right.
imagine, there are some specifically progressive activist politicians who are not thrilled. But
I'm sorry, but if your first trip to the Middle East, I would have just done Israel.
The trip began in Israel, right? And that is our most reliable, trusted, longstanding partner in that region, right? And so by the US brokering all of these geopolitical relationships with Israel and these other countries, right, we're thereby strengthening our own position. And it seems like, to your point, Anthony, yes, Saudi Arabia is the sort of like, we got to deal with this thing, but it's all stemming out of our, bedrock, ironclad, strong relationship with Israel, which hopefully will then leverage positive results from these other places.
well, and I think that's also why Biden is not budging on two counts. One is not budging on bringing Palestine into this wholeheartedly, because Palestine is not a strategic partner when it comes to relationships with the other Arab countries.
Right.
And then also why he is not budging on reinstating the Iran nuclear deal, which people have different opinions on. The Israelis do not want us back in the Iran nuclear deal. They want us to put a military threat on Iran and think that that's the only way that Iran will not keep developing nuclear weapons.
So what are our young politicians saying and doing about this?
So specifically about I'll start first with someone who's talking specifically about the Iran nuclear deal. And I figured I'll just read a quote and you can guess who it is. Here's the quote. Our attempted embrace of Iran is creating strategic incoherence. And this is an opportunity for the president to understand that, to shift away from that, and to start treating allies like allies and enemies like enemies.
Ooh, I honestly don't know if that's a Republican or a Democrat.
Yeah.
I thought it was well said. It feels like it's more on the Republican side.
Seth Moulton.
Oh.
Ooh, great. August Pfluger.
You always guess August Pfluger.
This guy August Pfluger gets so much airtime.
I know.
Can someone pick him for me one time, please?
It's Mike Gallagher, Republican from Wisconsin. Very, very like foreign policy heavy, was in the military. Definitely a guy who focuses a lot on our like global efforts around the globe. And, what I think is interesting just about him and what he's saying is that he's basically saying what Israel is saying, which is the nuclear deal is not strong enough. Diplomacy is not going to deter Iran in the way that we need to deter Iran to actually have safety and peace in the Middle East. I'm going to move on to somebody else who,
thank goodness,
I will tell you is a Democrat, but I think is a really interesting Democrat when it comes to the issue of
giving
Israel.
it away that they're
thanks for the clue.
Okay.
Finally. It's going to be really easy. Yeah.
Wait. I had activists from Jewish Voice for Peace accusing me of pinkwashing, accusing me of aiding and abetting apartheid. I even remember coming across an activist with a shirt that read "Queers for Palestine." I remember telling the activist, does the opposite exist? Are there Palestinians for queers?
You're not going to do her twice in a week, but I was going to say Sarah Jacobs.
No, it's Squad.
Who's someone like Rashida?
Michael, you're very, very off. I feel like you didn't totally hear what I said.
Okay, maybe
because you said it was the Squad. Basically, there is this whole line of rhetoric that comes from the Squad and specifically progressive activist politicians and progressive activists who are very pro-Palestine, who believe that Israel is an apartheid state.
Right.
And that's sort of what this quote is referencing, but it's referencing someone being told that they're aiding an apartheid state. And this person is very pro-Israel, and it's Richie Torres, who is a Democrat from New York who represents the South Bronx.
Isn't he kind of squatty?
He's okay, but this is what's interesting is he labels himself a very pro-Israel progressive.
Yeah.
Most progressive politicians, specifically the squad, who are very upset with what's going on in Biden's trip, are on the side of Palestine much of the time. And so I just think Richie Torres is a really important person to know about, because if you're pro-Israel and you also consider yourself progressive, Richie Torres is definitely your guy.
Well, we're 0 for 2 anyways.
Yeah, great.
What's the third one?
Okay, I have one more, and this can be the wrap up. When an American citizen is murdered abroad, it is typically standard procedure for the U.S. to open a criminal investigation. But in this case, the State Department and the Biden administration have yet to launch an independent U.S. investigation into Shireen's murder. Shireen is that Al Jazeera murder journalist who was killed recently. I don't know if you remember that.
Wow. Yeah.
Michael, maybe we should work together on this one.
Yeah, let's team up. Let's team up. Let's phone a friend.
Okay, can I, before you guys get too far, because I don't want us to sound really dumb. You're so wrong.
Nice.
Into her murder.
Pro-Israeli.
No.
Squad. No, pro-Palestine.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Rashida Tlaib?
Yes. This is literally like, God, I'm sorry to anyone listening. These guys sound like dumbasses today.
For some reason, I'm not. Is it the static? Is it static?
To everything you were saying before, Anthony, about the oil and all of that. Yes. To everything about the Iran nuclear deal. Yes, that's going to be a huge deal. But I think that this just points to the fact that nothing will continue to be resolved between Israel and Palestine. And what that means for our young politicians is that there is still a huge fracture, specifically within the Democratic Party, around that issue. And there will continue to be. And I think that ultimately is very difficult for the Democrats to reconcile around when Biden makes trips like this or there's issues in the Middle East.
This is great. This has been the most fun we've ever had.
Oh my God.
Totally. I wish I was with you
no one has ever had this much fun talking about the Middle East.
And on that note, I'm empty.
Literally, that looks so mini. You're like holding it like a little pencil.
It comes in a Louis Vuitton clutch.
Yeah.
For sure it does.
Yeah, it's like, I got it on the runway in Milan.